Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 99 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and as always, I am joined by my awesome co host, Colton. How's it going, Colton?
Great. How you doing tonight, Christian?
Doing well, thank you. Before we get too far into this episode, I just wanted to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by PureMTGO.com. If you would like to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel and check out our Patreon. With that out of the way, let's get on to the podcast for this week.
All right, sounds good.
First up, First up, as always, we wanted to talk about the big Pauper events going on this weekend.
Yeah.
Um,
So the next big MTGO Popper event that's scheduled is the Popper Showcase Qualifier, Sunday, May 3rd at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Do remember everyone that as you check the schedule for MTGO events that everything is Pacific time. So please do schedule accordingly.
yeah, I'm super excited to see the results from that, see what decks do well.
Same. We've been seeing lots of decks kind of come up and then go down, and we'll see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, so speaking of decks that we hope will do well, we do have a deck that we want to highlight this week, and that is the UR or the blue red Scred Delver slash Fairies deck. Colton, I'm pretty sure that this is one of your favorite decks in the format, so if you wanted to get us started there.
Yeah. So this is probably one of, if not my favorite deck to play in the format. I played this deck a lot in paper and in Magic Online. Funnily enough, I don't actually own the deck. I had a friend who had it built pretty much for me at our local game store. And every time there was a popper event, he just handed me the deck and I'd play it because he knows I like the style of deck. I like tempo decks. I've liked them for a long time. I've played them in standard. I've played them in Pioneer. I played them in modern, and I played them in popper. They're just a really fun deck for me to play. So
Yeah, so what would you view as like the goal for the deck?
so Scred Fairies is and Scred Delver are what we like to call a tempo deck in the format or an aggro control deck. Essentially, what you're really trying to do is that you're trying to pressure your opponent with pretty generally smaller but pretty evasive creatures, and at the same time you use efficient removal spells and good counter spells to keep your opponent from being able to fully get their game plan going. So rather than a pure aggro deck like burn or mono red or mono white, where you're just trying to go as quickly as possible and hope that it works out, you have a little bit more control of, well, I'm going to counterspell this that my opponent does, or I'm going to try to bolt the or scred this creature that's in my way so I can get in for more damage.
Gotcha. So really, I think one of the like key points about playing a tempo deck is just thinking about like how can I push through as much damage as possible. Not dissimilar from an aggro deck, but sometimes you do have the flexibility of thinking a few more turns ahead instead of just trying to kill them immediately.
hmm Yeah, and one of the upsides to playing a tempo deck is that your threats tend to be pretty evasive. Most of the creatures in the deck do fly, so they're pretty hard for most of the other creatures in the format to block. Um, the downside to this style of deck is that your creatures are more evasive, but they also tend to be smaller. So if that scares you, if you don't like playing your biggest creature being a 3/2, if you want to play something a little bit bigger, this is probably not a good deck for you to play. But if you can get okay with that, a feeling of I'm going to win with a couple of 3/2s flying in the air, then this is a great option.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to say is right now, I think that this is probably a really good choice to play in an event, especially something like Pauper Showcase.
hmm
Because right now, a lot of the top decks are slightly more aggressive decks, and I actually think that this deck is pretty good against this style of decks because you get to play all the lightning bolts and all the spreads and everything, and then you're able to kill them before they can reload. So
Yeah, this deck is really good at that. I also really like the consistency that this deck has. It doesn't often have the most power that a lot of other decks have, like elves or something similar. It's not super explosive, but because you get to play cards like Ponder and Preordain and sometimes like one or two of Brainstorm, you get to filter through your deck a little bit more and you get a lot more consistent draws than a lot of other decks do. So your average draw is going to be greater than a lot of other decks' average draw just because you get the flexibility of having cantrips in your deck.
Alrighty, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the deck?
I want to say that blue red is my current favorite version of the deck. I know a lot of people have been playing mono blue with the newer cards coming out like Mystic Sanctuary and that sort of stuff. 'Cause you can lock your opponent out with deprives, and you get the draw engine with the Tuna Blue card from Amonkhet. But that deck to me is a little bit slower, and if you're not careful, it can just get run over really quickly. But I know people are really big on that deck, and there is also a blue black. The blue black control deck is currently also a Delver deck, and that's another pretty decent option if you like to play a little bit more of a slower controlling game as well. But this is my current favorite Delver deck in the format.
I definitely agree with you. With that, did you want to go ahead and get on to our main topic?
Yeah, so our main topic for this week is we wanted to do. So usually in the past they've done kind of a full set review on this podcast for the all the commons in the set, and we both agreed that although that can be kind of fun, it's also very time consuming, and a lot of the cards just are not worth talking about because a lot of them don't are not designed for with Pauper in mind, or they don't really do much for Pauper. So we decided we took. I think we have a list of about 13 or 14 cards that we both thought could actually make a pretty good impact in the format. So with that out of the way, did you want to talk about our first card there, Christian?
Yeah, so the first card that we have up, and also the card that I'm probably most excited about, is Light of Hope, which is for white. It's an instant that you choose one. You can either gain 4 life, destroy target enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature.
Yeah,
I really like this specifically in the mono white devotion deck. I think this is probably a two, maybe a three of in the main deck, and you could put like any extras in the sideboard or whatever.
yeah. I really like the flexibility that this card has in the mono white deck. We had it in when I was playing on stream Saturday. I played mono white heroic, and I was really hoping for this card against a couple of matchups. We played against I want to say it was a mirror, and I managed to get out the first big threat, which is usually how you win the mirror. They was able to journey to nowhere my creature, and I couldn't find another one. So sometimes
Right.
just
Yeah.
even that is really good, getting back your creature for 1 mana.
Yeah. So that is specifically one of the reasons that I really like this card in the main deck, is because it almost feels like you get to cheat a little bit and just play like sideboard cards 16 and 17, because like it's not completely dead if you draw it and you like there's no like journey to nowhere to destroy, because you can still pump your guy, or if you happen to run into like the like burn matchup or whatever, like 4 life is worth about 1.3 cards, which is relatively good, especially against them.
Mm-hmm. And even if you're up against the Bogle's deck or the mirror, you can sometimes just pop off an aura off their dude to make it smaller than yours.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm pretty sure that this card is going to be really sweet as a combat trick against them. And then there's also, you can destroy, like especially in the mirror, like you can destroy their enchantments to just really get them if you want to.
Yeah, sometimes just trying to just use this as like a 2 or 3 for 1. Sometimes in combat is just really powerful.
Um, and then the next card that we had is for a blue and one generic. It's called Keep Safe. It's an instant that counters target spell that targets a permanent you control, and then you also draw a card. I think that we both thought this would be really good in the sideboard of the Delver decks, and potentially in the blue black Gurmag Angler decks. I don't see it as being more than like a one or a two of when it does make the sideboard, but I really like it specifically in the mono blue deck.
Yeah, I think that this card is really good against if you're playing Delver against the mirror or against any sort of black or any sort of black, white, or red deck that's either going to try to Doomblade your creatures or try to like cards like Agony Warp or cards like Flame Slash and Lightning Bolt that see play everywhere in this format or Journey to Nowhere. Just being able to two for one those spells sometimes, especially later in the game, is really really big.
Yeah, for sure. Especially against like the style of decks that will be trying to remove your stuff. They typically try and get by with one for ones until they can start landing like a really big like two or three for one. And so getting to two for one them when they thought that they were just going to try and attrition you out is going to be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Being able to two for one in Popper is a really really big deal. It's a bigger deal I think than in a lot of other formats.
Um, and then up next, we had for one black, it's a creature called Serrated Scorpion. And it's a 1/2 that whenever it dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. We both really thought that this would be good in the green black aristocrats deck. Um, I I see it somewhere as like a 2 of in the main, but I think you're a little bit higher on it than that.
Yeah, I think that this card is, especially with the card that came out in um Theros, the enchantment creature. It's one and a black for 1/3. You can pay one, sack a creature. And each opponent loses one life. You gain one life. Just being able to use this, sack it to that, deal three to your opponent, gain three life, and then grow your mortician beetles all at the same time seems really really good, especially late game. Because the issue that that deck has sometimes is that your creatures are all come back most of the time, but oftentimes they just get outclassed by other things late game. And sometimes you just need to have a couple extra points of reach just to be able to get through those last points of damage.
Gotcha. That makes sense to me. I think one of the reasons that I liked it a little bit less than you did, well, liked it less is probably wrong. The reason that I liked it specifically is more a one or a two of because I also agreed that it would probably be better in the late game. So it would like you would have enough time to draw it because it's not something that you would necessarily want in your opening hand or anything. At least I
Yeah.
didn't think so.
I think it's also kind of good because you can just, it's one black, you grow your carrion feeder, bolt your opponent, or shock your opponent for one black is pretty good.
I don't know. It'll also specifically be good because two life in this format is not nothing,
Hmm.
especially if it keeps getting more aggressive like we have been seeing.
Yeah. So I think that this card is going to be good in those aristocrats deck. Rather, if you're playing, the big one right now is green black, and of course there's always red black aristocrats that kind of floats around. But I think that this deck is definitely going to see play in that deck, especially with how well I think it's a pretty fun deck to play, and it's always been right on the cusp of just being good but not quite good enough. I think that this is one of the couple of cards that are helping it get to be good enough soon.
Alrighty. Then the next card that we were wanting to look at is a sorcery for a blue and two generic. Um, it costs two less to cast if you control both a human creature and a non-human creature, and it draws two cards. It's called Of One Mind. I feel like we both really like this, and specifically the fairy builds of the decks that still play Delver.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah, so I think this is going to cause kind of a split in especially in the mono blue Delver Fairies list. Right now, the current engine is Mystic Sanctuary with the one from Amonkhet that lets you draw two cards and you either have to discard a card to pick up a land. So the current way that deck gains card advantage is you just replay the Mystic Sanctuary, pick up that card, play it, draw two cards, put the card on top of your library, draw it next turn, pick it, play it, pick up the Mystic Sanctuary, put the Mystic Sanctuary back, put it on top of your library, and just keep doing that over and over again.
yeah,
So slowly
yeah. So
that gets you one extra additional card per turn. But the downside is that that does take some time to set up. You're only doing it as early as turn 4 at the very earliest. And the other issue is that you're typically only doing that in the mono blue list. You can't really do it in any sort of blue black or blue red Delver list because it's just it's not nearly as consistent because you're playing other lands besides islands. And drawing drawing 2 cards for 1 mana is pretty good. Ask any Affinity player how that feels.
Yeah, so I also agree that it's probably going to cause a split. Likely in formats where you want to be slightly quicker, you'll be playing this card because you don't really care about like accruing a bunch of advantage. But like if there are ever any formats where like you feel the need to like grind out your opponents, you'll probably be still playing the like Mystic Sanctuary Tragic Lesson builds. Um, so I really think it depends on what's good in the format and how you like to make your game plan.
Yeah, I think personally, if Tron's really good, you want to play something like this because you don't want to grind out Tron. You have to race Tron. But if the big control deck in the format is a teaching style deck or just a blue black angler deck, then probably the other way is the Tragic Lesson engine is a little bit better because that deck you're not going to race. That they just have too much removal. It's just not going to happen. So you're just going to need to slowly accrue advantage over time.
Yep. And then the next card that we had talked about for 1 green and 1 generic, it's an instant that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. If the creature you control has trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. The card is a ram through, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So I really like this card for 2 reasons. One, I think it's extremely good in the elf sideboard against for elf decks, specifically against slower angler decks and in the mirror. Because to me, honestly, one thing I dislike about playing elves is the mirror match. To me, is one of the most horrible things to sit through because both sides, what tends to happen is you both just dump your hands, and then both players are just tapping their well wishers every turn and gaining a whole bunch of life. So, and then you have your elf that just gets +1/+1 each time you play an elf, and you have the one that pumps the other elf for each elf you control. So they both just kind of balance out, and it's because you're not in um, a removal heavy color being in green, it's kind of just really hard to break board stalls in the mirror match. Sometimes I've seen a lot of L's mirror match just go to time, just because no, not you can't kill the other side's creatures. So what are you gonna do? You just gain life every turn. And I think a card like this, if you're even a tiny bit ahead, is going to be very, very good at being able to blow up an opposing creature.
Yeah. I don't know. I like this card mostly for the same reason. We've definitely all like seen the meme either on like Reddit or Twitter or whatever of like the two elves players at like nearly 1,000 life.
Mhm.
So
Oh, and I've lost your camera there, Christian. Oh,
is it back on?
yep, I got you now.
Alrighty. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about that card?
The other thing I wanted to say is that another deck that I've seen kind of around the peripheries of Pauper for a little bit, but just hasn't been able to break through is a I've seen mono green aggro decks, but not a mono green ramp deck. Um, I've seen a couple decks that have been playing like in the, about 6 months or a year ago that played uh, the greatest of all meme cards, Colossal Dreadmaw and Shifting Sandworm. Um, but two of the big issues that that deck faces is a being able to make sure that your ramp doesn't get killed because the best you get to play elves, but they often just get smushed by bolts. And sometimes you can land your big fatty like your shifting sandworm or whatever, but they can just put up enough. They can either they can usually sometimes just put up enough stuff in the way that you can't get through the big chunks of damage that you need to win the game. And a card like this, you can kill with you're playing a Dreadmaw. You can kill an angler and whack your opponent, or you can just get that little bit of removal you need just to push through those last couple points of damage.
Yeah, I don't know. I specifically also think that this card is going to be a lot of fun whenever like you're going to like see decks play like smaller creatures. And so you can use this as like a removal spell to push through and then also deal like 4 damage on top of it or whatever. Um,
Yeah, if you can get a big trampling dude, that's pretty good.
yeah. Anyway, so the next card that we wanted to talk about is a card for a red and one generic. It's an instant where you choose one. You either destroy target artifact or it deals 4 damage to target creature with flying. And it also has cycling for 2 generic. It's called Shredded Sails.
Yeah, so I I like this card mostly just a board card in some in any decks that can play red. So anything like Affinity or Scred Delver lists or any sort of Boros or Mardu Monarch list. I like this card a lot when there's a lot of Delver and Affinity running around. Like I know it's kind of weird that the deck it's good against or it's also good in. Um, just because it can kill flyers, which is pretty important against Delver, and destroys an artifact, which is good against the Affinity deck. And if you don't need it, if it's bad, you can just cycle it away for 2, which in Pauper is really not that bad.
Yeah, especially not the format tends to be just a little bit slower to where cycling for 2 shouldn't be like hugely backbreaking most of the time.
Now, cycling for 2 is also is just fine.
I don't know. I we talked about it, and I think you and I sort of disagree on this front. I think that in some of the decks, like the blue red Delver deck, this card could also be playable in the main deck actually as a one of, just because it does cycle away. Because so many decks in this format like play artifacts, and so this could be like one of those things where like you usually have like a flex slot, and I think this could be one of those cards that
Yeah,
sometimes sees play there.
this card, if you can sneak it in as a one of, can somebody just blow out Monarch decks? If you blow up their if they play Gilded Globe and it's their only artifact that they have and you blow it up, that can set them back a huge amount of tempo sometimes.
Yeah. Um, And then the next card that we want to talk about is a card that I'm sort of afraid of becoming good. And for 1 black, it's a 1/1 human soldier that has the activated ability of a black and one. You search your library for a card with the same name as it and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. I'm pretty sure the card is called Whisper Squad,
Yeah,
and
Whisper Squad.
and this is another card that we are both pretty sure is going to end up in the green black or red black aristocrats deck somewhere
Yeah.
in the 75 at least. And honestly, I'm sort of afraid of this card because I have a feeling that we're all missing the power level of it somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of it's not exactly Black Squadron Hawk, but it feels kind of similar in a lot of ways to Squadron Hawk, where it can keep tutoring itself out of the library. The fact that this cost 1 and a black to get one out of the deck is, it's not great for 2 mana for 1/1 is not a great rate, but when you're literally just getting it as free sack value in a deck that just dumps its hand by turn 3 or 4, that when you can get 3 or 4 cards off of one, when you get 3 or 4 sacrifices off of one card, that's pretty good in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think this card is going to end up being really good with something like Carrion Feeder, where every turn you just get to grow your Carrion Feeder for free by just paying 2 mana.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. That seems like something that's strong to me.
Yeah, and it can also even be kind of good if you go really heavy in the devotion to like a mono black deck, where you just because part of the problem I found with that deck is that you kind of just run out of dudes to play sometimes, and your life total takes a pounding in that deck too. So even though these enter the battlefield tapped, you can tutor them up during your opponent's end step, and it comes back in and it's untapped. So basically being able to have extra dudes that can help chump block and add extra devotion is pretty good.
For sure. Um, and then the next card that we wanted to talk about is for a red and 3 generic. It's an elemental dinosaur that is a 2/3. It has trample, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on it.
Yeah, Pyroceratops. So I've been kind of like back and forth on this card. The big downside is that it does die to bolt if you don't um have something to protect it. But this one of the big problems I found with the Blitz deck now, especially since Gataxian Probe and Daze and Gush all got banned on Blue Monday, is that uh, the deck suffers from you can make a big creature for one turn, but it sometimes just can't quite finish the game. And so having a dude that you can pump and is able to sometimes it takes 2 or 3 turns to win the game, and this guy can help you win the game on like the next turn or the turn after, and it's just there as a big beefy threat that your opponent has to deal with or they're going to die. It gives the deck more inevitability.
Yeah, so I will say the real downside to this card, in my mind, is that it costs 4 mana. So I think that there will be times where you just don't have the fifth land, so you have to just sort of play it and hope it doesn't get bolted. I
Hmm.
think I would like it a lot more if it was just a little bit cheaper to where you could play it and then immediately cast a cantrip or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but
The upside is that you can play mutagenic growth in this format, so you can save it for free if you need to sometimes. So
all right.
the next card kind of goes along with that. This is another one that I think is probably bad, but it's also just probably a card I'm going to play anyway, even though it is bad. And that's Spell Eater Wolverine. For 2 and a red, you get a 3/2, and it has double strike as long as there are 3 or more instant and/or sorcery cards in your graveyard. So I want to play this card because everyone knows how broken Temur Battle Rage can be. How about you get your dude free double strike after you just cast 3 cantrips?
Yeah, so I don't know. This is a card that, like you, I want to like. Um, I do think it has real value. Maybe not like the main deck, but like bringing it in any matchup where like your opponents are going to have like a lot of blockers, just as like a way to like slowly whittle down their board by just making
Yeah,
sure your guy hits first. Um, so hopefully we at least see it there. I'm hopeful at least.
yeah. Hopefully this will be in the board to help take out those pesky elves.
Yeah. And then our next card for a green and one generic is Wilt. It destroys target artifact or enchantment and it cycles for 2. I'm like this card is just naturalized but better in every way. It really shows the power creep of the cycling mechanic sometimes.
Yeah, this is literally just naturalized but better. If you guys are playing naturalized in your sideboard for any reason, you should take it out for this card.
Yeah, and that's pretty much like the beginning and the end of it there.
Yep,
Um,
that's literally it. If you're playing naturalized, take him out, play this card instead. It's just better.
and then the next card that we wanted to talk about is an aura for 1 white. It's called Solid Footing. It enchants a creature, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+1. And as long as it has vigilance, it assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Um,
Yeah, this card is a big upgrade for the mono white deck. And the reason it is because first of all it has flash, so you can use it as a combat trick if needed or a way to help save your creature from a bolt or a lightning slash, flame slash or anything like that. And the last line of text that it has is not nothing, especially when one of your best threats is a 0/4 when it comes in. And then you just, if you can slap on one of the auras like Sentinel Eyes that gives it vigilance, and then slap this on, suddenly you paid 3 mana, and your dude is now, what, it gives it +2, so it's now a functional 8/8 for 3 mana, I think, if I
yeah,
did the math correctly. That's insane.
yeah. So this is a card that I'm definitely excited to test out. I will say with the mono white heroic deck, I think this plus first card that we talked about, Light of Hope. I believe that both of these cards, at least for a little while, might be fighting for the same spots until it gets figured out. So this might be a card that we might not see like right away, but I think it will eventually be in the mono white heroic decks for sure as a two or a three of.
Yeah, I think so too. Just being able to make your Trailblazer just super big out of nowhere like that is just crazy.
Um, then the next card that we wanted to talk about is an instant for a black and two called Suffocating Fumes. Creatures your opponents control get negative one until end of turn, and it also cycles for two mana. Oddly enough, I think that this is one of those cards that should never ever see play in your sideboard, but maybe sometimes will sneak into some of the decks, like the blue black control deck, or like if Teachings ever comes back in the main deck, just because it is tutorable. And the negative one to your opponent's creatures can sometimes just demolish certain decks.
Yeah, and the fact that it's an instant too is also really good. That's why Electrickery sees so much play in the format.
Yeah. I don't know. I will say that the reason that I don't think this belongs in any sideboards, though, is because out of the sideboard, I usually like to be a little bit more efficient. And so cards like Shrivel or Nausea, unfortunately, probably still retain their slots over this card.
Yeah, Shrivel being 2 mana is definitely a big thing.
And then the next card that we wanted to talk about is a sorcery for a blue and three called Gust of Wind. And it costs two less to cast if you control a creature with flying. It lets you return a non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand and draws a card.
Yeah, so the obvious kind of comparisons here are probably Snap, Echoing Truth, and Repeal are probably the three big ones. The upside to this card is it does draw you a card. The downside is, of course, you sometimes do have to pay 4 mana for it, and it is a sorcery. So where we see this card primarily is being played in any sort of fairy slash delver list, because you do need to have a pretty high concentration of flyers in the deck for it to work. And mostly, what you're going to use this for is to get um, big things off the table that you can't really deal with if blue red if in your bolts or your screds, and in mono blue you just kind of can't deal with most things that are above 1 toughness because the only real blue removal spell that sees play is Piracy Charm, and sometimes you just need to be able to get the big threat like the Gerbag Angler or the big elf off the table so you can just get through. You don't need to. You can still fly over their dudes most of the time, but sometimes the backswing is going to kill you. So just being able to put them off of tempo, especially a card like Gerbag Angler, where if they delve their graveyard and only have like 3 mana up, well, congratulations, that Gerbag Angler is gone for a long time.
And then especially in those decks where the game plan with this card would be, by the time they could replay it, it's just too late.
Yeah, at the time they replay Angler, they're just dead.
I don't know. I also think that this card is pretty good against the like more mid-rangey decks that are based on like the Monarch mechanic, because a lot of times I think one of the things is that like with those decks you end up like trading who has control of the Monarch, and
Hmm.
even though it lets them get it back, the cards that they draw they can't play because they have to commit the mana to actually gaining the Monarch back if you use that. And so that's just like another thing that'll put them behind on tempo. So hopefully you can close the game before they get to start playing the extra cards that they've drawn.
Yeah, and sometimes you just get the core Skyfisher off the table, and then they have to bounce back. They have to play the mana to recast their artifact, or they have to play something else in order to recast their core Skyfisher. So it really puts them off tempo.
And then the next card that we wanted to talk about is an instant for a red and one generic called Fire Prophecy. And it deals 3 damage to target creature, and then you may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. If you do, draw a card.
Yeah, so we liked this deck, ironically, in the Monarch deck especially. The deck is really good, but sometimes you have cards that are just very clunky in that deck that you don't always want in your hand. Like sometimes you have like an extra bounce sign you don't need, or you have too many Glinthawks, and of course Skyfishers, not enough eggs to be able to put on the board to draw extra cards. So being able to kill something and then also essentially cycle something away for another card is pretty good.
Yeah, I'll also say that I think this card is pretty good in the like reanimator decks. Mostly because I think that those decks sometimes you have to like keep opening hands where you don't have all the pieces. And this not only slows your opponents down a little bit, but it also just gets you closer to being able to set up your combo.
Yeah, reanimator lists often struggle with what I like to call the Bogle's problem, where your hands are you can only mulligan so much, and sometimes your hands just kind of suck because you're a combo deck that needs specific pieces, and you have to find those specific pieces.
Hmm. Um, but yeah, outside of that, I think that that's all the cards that we really thought were going to at least had a chance to make an impact on Popper this time around.
Yeah, I think those are probably the highest most likely candidates to make the list in Pauper decks as of right now.
Yeah, sure. Um, so did you want to just go ahead and move on to what your match of the week was?
Yeah, so on Saturday I did get to stream a little over an hour on our podcast Twitch channel at CK Podcast on Twitch, and I played some Mono White Heroic and lost a lot. Only we were 0-2 when we entered the league, and then went finished the league 1-4, so that was not very good. Part of that was because I think it was the outdated list, so we got blown out a couple times by just not having the correct cards that we needed, and because I accidentally gave my creatures pro white when he had two enchantments on it. That Yeah, that was a big punt. So the good match that we had was I played some Affinity afterwards. I played the list that plays the two Witching Wells in it right now, because I think that card is really undervalued. Being able to scry two and then later being able to draw two extra cards is really good. And I played against a Naya Slivers player, and holy cow, I had no business winning that match, no business, and I somehow won 2-0. So the first game, no, was it 2-0 to 1? I somehow won that match. So the first game that I won, he got out two two lords plus the Gemhide Sliver, so all of his creatures could tap for mana, and then also had the one that gave all of his dudes poisonous, and then just had a board of probably like 5 or 6 creatures that were all like 3/4s and 4/4s, and I just managed to top deck a ton of Mirror Enforcers into an ATOG, and I managed to get the ATOG in, and he only blocked with one creature, and I got him with Teamer Battle Rage, and that felt really good. Got Teamer Battle Rage for 34 damage. That felt really good.
Yeah, it's always nice, especially if your opponent has the blockers, to where like they just like take the risk of like, nah, he's not gonna get me this time, and then you do.
Yeah. And then next game, I just opened ATOG Fleeing, and I was like, all right, here we go. And he got a similar board, not quite as good as the first time. Then I just flung ATOG for like 18 damage. So,
Well, that does sound sweet. I don't know. It's also exciting that you played against the Naya Slivers deck because that is a deck that I love, but am too afraid to play.
yeah, I don't. I can see why people like playing that deck. It's just not my style of deck to play, which is weird because I like playing Merfolk sometimes, but I don't like playing the Slivers deck. And they're almost the same deck. I don't know, maybe it's because I like
Um,
blue cards too much, but yeah, that was how my match went. I did a If you guys want to see me punt more, I'm going to try to start doing streams at least once a week over on Twitch, and I'll be posting more about that on Twitter.
Alrighty. And then I believe that the last thing that we wanted to talk about is we both have a sideboard card for the week.
Hmm.
If you wanted to get into yours first.
Yeah, so I was digging through lists yesterday, And I've been seeing a lot, and I mean a lot of mono white. Like holy cow, people are on this deck. Maybe they watched our last episode because everyone's playing mono white right now, which is fine. The deck is great, but I did not expect this much mono white, and I've been getting killed by it, and I've been playing it, and so I've been trying to think like what are some just generically good cards against that deck and against some other enchantment based strategies. And I found this in some Delver lists, and I was like, why is this card not seeing more play? Because this card is insane, especially against the heroic deck and the Bogles deck, and that's Auraflux. So Auraflux is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. It says each other enchantment gains during your upkeep, pay 2 or sacrifice this enchantment. So for those of you that don't know, mono white is like a 20-ish land deck, and you rarely, if ever, get to 4 mana, and if you do, it's probably not good. It means you're probably behind and you're probably losing. The deck is designed to function on about 2 or 3 mana. So the general thing, and I think if I remember correctly, I think that some of the creatures that deck plays sometimes are, I could be wrong, but sometimes versions of that deck also play some enchantment creatures, and so just being able to, here, let me double check here real quick. So just being able to force your opponent to tax them to keep their enchantments around, and most of the time they're not going to be able to keep all of them around, even if they do have the mana to pay for some of it. And that can just really, really ruin that deck's day because at the end of the day, their creatures are 0/4s and 1/1s.
Yeah.
So even if you're not directly killing their creature doesn't do anything anymore, especially the Trailblazer. If that Trailblazer doesn't have any enchantments on it, it may be like a 1/5 or a 2/6, which is a lot less scary than say a 5, like a 5/10 or anything like that. So yeah, and against Bogles, they might, like, unless they have the removal for it, they pretty much just scoop it up because
We'd love to see it from our opponents.
yeah, because a lot of they're playing abundant they're playing the abundant growth, the one that like turns it into a rainbow land and utopia
Yeah.
sprawls
Yeah.
for their mana acceleration, and they just slap enchantments on their bogle. So if you just get this down, they're kind of they usually only play one. They only have like 1 or 2 lands in play most of the time. So and each of their and even if they have a bunch of utopia sprawls, cool. Each of those utopia sprawls is now -1 mana. So you really hurt the Bogles deck if they can't keep enchantments on the board. And sure, they play green so they can remove it, but sometimes they just don't have it. Most times they don't have it, and yeah, I think this card's really good. I don't see why more decks don't play it. Especially since mono white is such a big deck right now, and it can just really blow them out, especially in the long game. I've seen it mostly in Delver lists, but I really think that this card could do really well in like a list like Affinity or Tron or Blue Black, especially if Bogles and Mono White, especially Mono White, continues to be a big force in the format.
I don't know. I definitely agree. I think that card has always been really, really solid the times that I've played it. And like just having a blowout against like a few specific decks in the format is usually where I like to be with my sideboards.
Hmm.
And that one is definitely one of those types of cards.
Yeah, and I especially think this is good where they're adding more and more enchantments, taking out more and more instants from the Mono White deck, and a lot of their recursion is like Sentinelize. Well, if their Sentinelize comes back, it's just going to die again. So you have to
Yeah.
keep paying the tax every turn to keep bringing it back.
Yeah. Um, and then my sideboard card for the week was Gleeful Sabotage, specifically out of the Elves deck. I picked it for sort of the same reasons that you picked Auraflux, but to me, this card is a little bit more powerful in the Elf deck than Auraflux might be in the decks that they are because it hits more decks in the format. For those who don't know, it's a one green and one generic for sorcery that destroys target artifact or enchantment, and it has Conspire, which means that as you play it, you can tap two untapped creatures you control that share a color with it. Whenever you do, you can copy it and choose a new target for the copy. So I think this is really powerful against, like, say, like Affinity, like you get to remove two of their blockers, or against like Bogles, you get to just remove the two things that pump their Bogle, and then sometimes, like, they might not draw any other enchantments that are like really good against you, or sometimes like you can just bring it in against like decks that might side into like enchantment hate for you, or like just play enchantments that can remove your stuff. I'm thinking of stuff like Journey to Nowhere there.
Hmm.
um, so I think that this card is all around powerful, and it's good against a lot of the top decks in the format.
Yeah, it really is. It's like it's for blue you have Auraflux and for green you have Gleeful Sabotage, pretty much.
Yeah. Um, but anyways, unless you had anything else, I'm pretty sure that's going to do it for this week's episode of Common Knowledge.
Yeah, I think I'm good for now.
Yeah, so if you would like to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JessGuyDad, and you can get in touch with Colton on Twitter at BoltSnapBaral, or you can feel free to email us at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. And so if you have any questions on the Pauper format, or any comments on like commons that we may have missed for the format, or anything else, you can send us an email there or just leave a comment. Thanks
Hmm.
again to our sponsor, puremtgo.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network, for letting us be a part of it. And last but certainly not least, be good to each other, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks.